how to conduct a chronic absenteeism intervention campaign. Boy, that's a mouthful. The basic gist is, how do we lower chronic absenteeism rates across the United States? Hi, I'm Brian Stevens, with one of the co-founders of KCK-12, where our entire mission is to increase and stabilize student enrollment in public schools. So with that kind of understanding, let me get into a deep dive. And that's what I've been asked by lots of people recently. Like, I can't believe they want me to sit here and speak at them for at length on how to do this. So it's kind of an honor. It's kind of cool, but I'm going to get into the nit and gritty of all the aspects of what I think is a thorough campaign to reduce chronic absenteeism in your schools, or if you need help getting your student to show up, some things to do about that, right? So let's jump into it. First, I am going to put chapter markers in here so you can skip ahead if you need to, but I'd encourage you to kind of go through the whole thing. I spent significant time kind of laying out the structure of this, because at first I was like, do I really need to explain what the problem is? And yeah, I've been speaking on this subject now for a year. I need to explain the problem. I even need to explain what the definition of chronic absenteeism is. So look, let's dig in, no further ado and all that. So let's talk about the problem. And so, really, since COVID, chronic absenteeism rates in the United States have spiked up. So in your community, if they've spiked up, just know you're not alone. I mean, it used to be, 15% or so was a pretty standard thing for a lot of districts, some a little better, some a little worse. And now the surge is 28 and in the 30%. So a dramatic increase of chronic absenteeism, right? And this is all really increased since COVID. And a lot of people are choosing, for some reason, to continue not to go back to school, which is a little frightening, right? It's a little frightening. So the one population that is disproportionately affected is, of course, our at-risk students, our disadvantaged students. We're going to talk in some other videos about the widening achievement gap, which we've been concerned about for the last 50 years, and how to combat that. But those rates of chronic absenteeism rates were already in the mid-20s. Before COVID, the disadvantaged students were already in the mid-20s, and now they're approaching 40%. So, geez, the problem is big, and I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why I've been requested to do this deep dive, and so let's kind of keep going. So I think that I have to define what chronic absenteeism means. We do a national poll every year on what do parents want in their schools, like why are they picking this school over that school, what's going to keep them in your school. So we're going to release the most recent data coming up. But we also started a few years ago running a chronic absenteeism poll. Why aren't your students in school? What can we do to get them back? And that has been very enlightening, because most parents will say, and I'm not going to dig into the study right now, but I'm just going to give a little highlight so we can keep moving, is that most parents will say, yes, showing up to school is important. And then the counter to that is they'll say, my student's showing up. And then you actually look at how many days their child has missed. Those parents have actually said those two things. And you see that their students are chronically absent. So they don't seem to understand how many days either the student is missing, or the importance of how many days they can miss. This is not like a job where you get 2 weeks vacation, during the academic year. You don't get to have 180 days in the school year and then miss 2 weeks on top of that, right? That's why we have holiday vacation and spring break and summers off for a lot of the students. Those are their breaks. It's not during the 180-day academic year. So it's not like a job. And I think we should dig into this a little bit on our next survey, but why do they think that missing 18, 20, 25 days is okay? Is that because that's what you are allowed to miss in your employment? But you can't translate the two because of all those other vacation days. So there seems to be a complete disconnect on what the standard is. So the standard is, and this is in most states and most districts, if your district is different, if your area is different, I would love to know that in the comments. I'm still trying to, of course, increase our own knowledge branch. So let me know. So it's typically if you miss more than 10% of the school year for any reason. Now, it's that for any reason. Maybe that's it. Maybe what we need to do some more research on here at KCK-12 is do people think if they have a good reason for missing, that's okay? And I know your employers out there that are worried about that, young people in your employ and getting people that want to, grow with your company and grow with your businesses. What's the big deal if I come in 3 hours late? What's the big deal if I come in 3 hours late? I mean, I had a car problem. I didn't feel good. I was sick. I mean, we've heard all the reasons, and maybe they're all valid reasons. Maybe every one of those reasons are valid, but you're still missing the opportunity to learn. And from a work environment, you're still missing the opportunity to collaborate with your team and to add value. So in the school space, if you ain't there, you ain't learning. You ain't learning. And so it's almost as if people are just okay with, well, I had a valid reason. I mean, my child was sick. They were sick for 3 weeks. They had a sniffle. They had a cold. And I'm not trying to make light. Okay, look, you can make all the comments you want. I don't care. I'm not trying to make light of people with serious illnesses, okay? You ought to know we ain't talking about that right now, all right? We are talking about people that just find every valid reason not to get their children to school, or their kids did what I did when I was old. We're going to get into that. Just skip school. Just miss it. Fake illness. I don't feel good, mommy. And my mom was a critical care nurse, and she would just, you better get to school. And so the issue is for any reason, they're chronically absent if they miss more than 10%, which is about 18 days a year. And so you can kind of see during the course of the year, in the first couple months, if they're missing 3 or 4 days, that's going to track to missing, more than 18 days across the standard. So yeah, I think what's really weird is, and I'm spending a lot of time on this definition because I don't think society right now cares about necessarily being late. Like, I mean, you have friends. Hey, we're all going to go to dinner. We're going to have dinner at 6:30. And people are rolling in at 7:15. And you're like, I've been here. I'm waiting. I'm hungry. I thought we were meeting at 6:30. Or do you do what some of my friends have to do, where they have to move their clock 15 minutes early to lie to themselves about what time it is? Well, the issue with our children is every minute they miss is a minute that's very difficult to make up. So look, the standard is 10% or more, and that is a lot of days. That is a lot of days. So that's the standard, and it's for any reason. And I like this definition, whether legitimate or not. You can have super awesome legitimate reasons, but you're still chronically absent. I'm not saying you don't have a reason for doing it, but you ain't there, you ain't learning, and that's the impact that we got. Okay, definition. I know. I think I could spend 3 hours on just the definition alone. I look at these polls, and I go talk to parents and run focus groups. It's crazy out there. Okay, so I had to make a decision on this deep dive on how quick I get to the meats and potatoes. Like, how do you actually get the students to return? And one of the things that I added to this section, because I think it's really paramount, is we have to talk about how it affects the student. Because that alone ties into the why it's important to show up, and then you do the framework for actually getting them to show up. But if everyone on the team doesn't understand how it affects the student, you're never going to get them to show up. Because if it's not important to people, they just don't do it anymore, right? And so I'm going to dig right now into the how it affects the student. And the one thing that jumped out at me with this was this no school thing. Have you guys heard about this? No schooling? I didn't say homeschooling. I didn't say Montessori schools. I didn't say private schools. I didn't say public schools. I said no school as like this viral thing that's going on where I'm going to dig into that later, okay? But this video is about the people that aren't. Yeah, I did it. You can't do it. You can't hope your kids just organically learn something, man. We got to get them in school, and we got to teach them all the foundational elements so they can be an awesome, awesome adult, right? That's the goal of education, right? So I'm going to get into that no school stuff later. But right now, let's talk about the effects of missing a lot of days, because I've had a lot of parents say, well, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? They miss 5, 10, 15, 20 days. What's the big deal? Well, first off, and the research is overwhelming on this. And if you want to do a deep dive and you want all the sites and references, man, I'm your guy. I'll get it to you. Send me an email, make a comment. I'll dig into this. But for brevity's sake, I'm not going to read every academic study that I looked at, all right? So, number one, lower academic performance, period. The less your student goes to school, the lower their academic performance as a statistic. There's always an anomaly. Okay? I'm not going to talk about the super smart kids that are just, they just gather all this information out of whole cloth and it's just awesome sauce, right? We're talking about statistically, on average, it's lower academic performance. And it's mainly because the student is falling behind on the core subjects, reading, math, science, and it's difficult to keep up. You start to miss gaps of information. The time required to dig in on your own free time may be made up. And I get it, like especially if a child is sick and unable to learn for a couple of weeks. If you've had that child, I've had that child, it's so difficult to have them catch up. I mean, you're spending nights and weekends burying them, really stressing them out in additional quotient just to get them caught up. And I know a lot of parents do that when you have an unforeseen missed day. But so let's try not to have as many of those as possible. I think that's the area. And it is funny from my own personal experience during my formative years as a child. Some of you have heard me talk about this, but I was in learning disabled classes. It's embarrassing, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I'm okay now. Thanks for asking. I was in learning disabled classes. I had a speech impediment. Couldn't say R's or S's. So this is for my sister. Instead of saying firecracker, which I'm very proud I can say now, I said firecracker. And you want to make fun of me because I couldn't. She made fun of me a lot. But I missed a lot of school. I missed a lot of school because of embarrassment and shame. And my mother was putting herself through nursing school and becoming a critical care nurse. Totally awesome stuff, raised by a single mom and some great family members. And I just wouldn't go. I mean, she would leave at 5:30 a.m. to go to the hospital, and I just wouldn't wake up. This was a different day. This is in the 70s and early 80s, right? And they didn't have all the technology we have now to track. And so, but I was falling further and further behind. And finally, my family made a conscious decision that I was falling behind and maybe I needed to get my butt into gear and actually show up to class. But I missed a lot of days, and that didn't help. I mean, that's just my own experience, right? So that difficulty in catching up is, I don't know how to overestimate the issue of that. I mean, time in the seat learning is critical. All right. So, the other issue that persistent absenteeism is linked to is likelihood of failing actual classes and then having to repeat grades. And that kind of translates into the student not believing in themselves, not believing that they're smart and capable. And maybe they are. Maybe they are the bomb diggity, but they're beaten down and they feel demoralized and they feel ashamed. You don't want to go to school and be the kid that's held 2 years back. And you think, well, you're not smart. You failed the grade because you're not smart. Maybe you failed the grade or the course because you weren't present. You didn't show up. You didn't dig in, or you didn't have people help you dig in. And the teachers and the staff and the superintendent of the school board cannot help the student dig in if they are not present. They're not present. Now, it sounds like I'm putting a lot of blame on the parents. I'm not. I'm going to get into what we need to do to help parents and to translate these definitions in a little bit, all right? But right now we're focusing on the babies. We're focusing on the students. Okay. High absenteeism rates are also linked to increased dropout rates or delayed or no graduation, which, by the way, psychologically, and I'm not going to totally nerd out with you right now, that depletes their morale. It depletes their ability to believe in themselves and to achieve whatever they want in life. So everyone, Entitled American Dream, we get it, but you got to put the work in first, right? And you got to be present. And so when the kids start to miss school and the parents either allow it or don't know about it or find reasons, excuses for it, whatever the case may be, or maybe there's some really valid issues that the school can help with. I'm going to get into that too, right? Once we get into the framework of how to do it. So it's a very multifaceted issue, and it takes a very multifaceted team to fix it. All right. So delayed early graduation. Now, this is the issue that I think that the other negative effects are the social and emotional development issues. And, regular attendance is so important to learn how to deal with people. I mean, you've done a group project, right? Man, I made my daughter do group projects, and I'll tell you what, they are tough because dealing with other human beings can be really rewarding and really painful. And it's in school that we learn how to emotionally deal with other people and not become a massive introvert like I wanted to do last week. Story for another day. But decreasing engagement isn't the cure to build a great adult, to build a great scholar. You have to force engagement. You have to force socialization almost until it becomes natural. And we saw this with COVID. And there's so many papers, and maybe I'll do another video on this, but this desocialization, increased narcissism traits, some people get more isolated, and we're working our way out of it, but it's going to be a long road. So you want your student, even if they don't always like everybody else, to learn how to get along with everybody, learn how to build relationships with peers and teachers and adults and students. And you don't want to have those feelings of isolation and anxiety and depression. And you're missing too many days, you will absolutely get those issues, isolation and anxiety. That makes me so sad to just even think about that. Okay. Another issue, another problem with high chronic absenteeism rates is lower lifetime earnings. Let me make it real. Let's make it real. Okay, fine. I'm cool with a little anxiety. I'm cool with a little isolation. I don't like people anyway. I don't really need to go to school. I can do all the tests really well. I mean, I can just click the buttons and all that stuff. But there's a direct link. There's a direct link to decreased attendance and lower lifetime earnings. Now, maybe that's because they didn't get the education, or maybe that's because they just didn't learn how to work with others in a great way. I have not read a study to explain the why that is. We know it's happening, but we don't know exactly what the reasons are. So better to be safe than sorry and get the babies in school, right? Okay. And then certainly there are fewer career opportunities as delayed graduation rates, failing classes means you maybe can't get into trade schools or the military or college or whatever the case may be, right? And so those post-secondary opportunities are at a lower rate for people that miss a lot of school. All right. Now, we briefly touched on the health and well-being, that anxiety, but there are significant studies out there that explain increased behavioral issues, which probably ties right back into that lack of social connections, right? And then you have these community and social impacts, which is lack of civic engagement, increased public costs because some of those people require more long-term services because they're not actually paying into society and things like this. I think we covered that pretty well. So I hope at this point, I know you're watching the video, right? You know the importance, but I hope you now have some tools and steps to explain to others why their babies need to be there, right? Like why their school needs to be there, because this is what we're up against. All right. Let's talk about a subject that we're not supposed to talk about when it comes to public schools: funding, money. And I dig in to how it affects school funding on various cases, because the lower a school budget, the less they can do for the children. I know, and I dig into this subject. I have a whole new keynote speech about the funding model for public education, but regarding chronic absenteeism, Brian, don't chase squirrels. Just stay right here on chronic absenteeism, right? And how it affects school funding. It's important because of those resources. Now, there are two basic models that I'm aware of in the United States. Now, we do not do work in every single state. So if you have a different model in your state, I would love to hear it and add on to it, give you due credit. I'd appreciate the education. But there's two fundings. It's the average daily attendance and the average daily membership, so ADA and ADM. So the ADA, under this model, its funding is based on the average number of days the student is present. So when students miss school, the ADA, the average daily attendance rate, decreases, which reduces the amount of state funding, in this case, that the school receives. And so this is, in some states, the calculation is just done throughout the year. So think about this from a budgetary standpoint. We budget to hire this many teachers, this much staff. We want to have this many, I was going to say paper and books, but maybe it's laptops now. I don't know. Right? I'm getting old. Like, I was going to say like chalk. Like we need to buy a bunch of chalk, but it's probably dry erase or smart boards at all these schools now. But we budgeted to pay for all that stuff based on, 50,000 students being in our district this year. And then all of a sudden our budget is just shaved in half. And you know what that means to businesses, right? In businesses, they have to do layoffs. They have to start cutting programs, and they're not going to cut the football program. I'm making fun of I love the football program. I love all the programs, I really do. But you know what I mean? They're going to cut some of the programs that are the most in need, that no one talks about, that no one advocates for, no one fights for. So those programs are just going to be shaved off. When was the last time you saw a school psychologist in your schools? I wonder. Band programs have been cut? What about the arts? What about more time spent on science programs and dope, really kick butt? I know like STEM programs and stuff got some really cool things to learn science, but how many schools have those now? Well, if our budgets are going down, cuts have got to occur somewhere. And so it impacts them without the ability to actually project what's coming. So it's very difficult to plan. You could certainly plan if a student's not enrolled. You don't have them. You don't plan on getting that funding for the entire year. I get it. But if they're there and you plan on the funding and it disappears as you go, weird, hard cuts, school closures, weird things happen, right? So it definitely affects the schools. And then under this average daily membership, this model is based on the funding of students enrolled. But even regardless of how many days they attend, which they don't get docked in those programs, they do, however, eventually get unenrolled. They do eventually get unenrolled. And so then that money goes out. So the student was enrolled, let's say mid-year, 90 days in. They said the student's not showing up, so we're going to unenroll them. So they're going to lose half the funding for the year. That is still an unknown, unplanned for budget slam that affects all the awesome programs that parents and caregivers demand of their schools. So yeah, from a global standpoint, a student not showing up impacts all the students. So first, it impacts the student, their long-term outcome, then it affects the entire group, right? All right. And then, of course, we have state and local funding formulas too. And those local county formulas or city formulas, depending on how your school districts are funded, they're still cut money based on missing school or unenrollment. The programs are so diverse and so different in many states. I'm not going to cover them now, but know that they will get their state and county money deducted, and they're going to lose money. This is what I want to get to. So they're losing money across the board, but they also have to spend now more money trying to find the students. Wait, so I'm losing money because they're not showing up, and I've got to spend more money to try to find them. So you better if you go out and find them. If you're going to spend the money to combat chronic absenteeism, here's your first pro tip of the day. I think that was kind of funny. I'm going to keep that in. Pro tip of the day is if you're going to create a chronic absenteeism intervention campaign, it better work. If it's not working, you're losing good money after bad here, right? So be careful about that. Now, some people are going to say that the federal funding is not impacted by chronic absenteeism. But it kind of is. It kind of is because like Title I funding, which provides funding for those low-income students, when I was a kid, like me when I was a kid, right, is they require the schools to maintain accurate data on student enrollment and attendance. And those programs and grants can be taken away. So this impacts it across the board. And then, if you're, obviously we hit on this, but if you're losing programs and you're losing staff, you're going to cut programs. You're going to reduce resources for intervention, laying off teachers and staff. It's a horribly vicious cycle. Okay. And then clearly the impact on society as a whole is that we are not training our next people to be awesome and successful. So, all right. So let's get into it. Let's get into how to, so Jackson, you're going to put your little markers in here, and we're going to talk now about the meat and potatoes, how to reduce chronic absenteeism. And I think that I originally put that it's like a two-pronged approach, that you have to deal with the parents. I say parents, and I mean the caregivers, right? It could be the grandparents, it could be the aunts and uncles, whatever that is. I'm just going to call them parents to keep it simple, and the children. But it's really a three-pronged approach because you need the parents, you need the children, and you need the schools to all work together in order to substantially reduce the chronic absenteeism rate. And so that's the first thing is we got to create a team atmosphere. It's not an us versus them, it's us, right? It's all us for a long-term society, for the children and everything. I get it. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. So if you do, put down why. Put down why you don't think it's the responsibility of the districts, of the schools, of the parents, and of the children. I mean, it's all three, right? I mean, it's got to be. And that's the only model that I've known that would actually, going back to our pro tip of the day, to actually reduce chronic absenteeism rates, like in real time. All right. So the framework. So this is a framework based on our experience and a lot of experts and a lot of people that have dug in. So we've taken this process. This is what we do. And if you can take this and do it yourself, great. If you want to hire us, that's awesome too. Either way, let's get those rates down, all right? So here's the framework. First, we've got to identify the issue. We've got to identify the why. Like, why are they missing? And going back to the study, what we learned when we do deep research analysis, needs assessments in particular districts, is that why is different. We learned in one why community, they didn't have any idea what the standard was. The parents, by and large, of the students that were chronically absent just thought that 20 days was okay. In other areas, we found that the parents didn't know that their children were missing so many days. And then you get some groups of people that just don't care. And then we have to educate them on why they should care, right? And so the why is critical. Now, how do you get to the why? You've got to ask. You've got to ask. And I'm telling you, it's not an app. It's not a little text message and email. It is real people connecting with real people. I'm going to say it again. It's real people connecting with real people and really trying to figure out those struggles. Now, for years, that was put on the teachers and the staff. And a lot of districts just don't have those resources anymore. Why? Because all those budgetary cuts and all those other demands that have been put on public schools, they're busy trying to train the babies not to track them down, right? So, yeah, that's where our company comes into place. Our company comes into place to fill that gap, to fill the gap between what schools are best at, which is educating the babies, and then making sure the babies show up to school, making sure the children show up to school. That's where we augment and help work in that tandem approach. All right. So, and what I mean by real people connecting is live phone calls. Now, wait for it. If I was talking to my daughter right now, I would say, honey, did you call him? And she would say, yeah, I called him. And I'd say, so you picked up the phone and you dialed the number and you heard their voice. And she'd go, no. I mean, I emailed them, or I texted them, or I Snapchatted them. I go, that's not what a call means. I know I sound 132 years old right now, but it's funny how so many people will say call in the generic text, like a Xerox. A Xerox is the name of a company, but they'll call that like, hey, Xerox is. That means copy it, right? But that's the name of a company, right? And so now we say call, and what we mean is we didn't call. We mean we text or Snapchatted or Instagrammed them or LinkedIn messaged them. No. When I say call, I mean like we have to actually hear their voice, and they have to hear our voice, and we have to have a conversation directly in time, not via text message. Now, that's the number one way to actually connect and determine why their student is not showing up. All right, now I'm going to explain to you what goes on in those phone calls, how we have to be soft and open and build trust and positivity for sure. Now, we certainly will use text messages and emails. I mean, those are quicker, easier forms of communication. And maybe if you have, let's assume you have 10,000 students that are chronically absent. That's not an unknown number for some districts, right? Maybe you get 3,000 of them through emails and text messages, and they just kind of, they're coming back, they're good, you reminded them, dope. But then you have to work on those other 7,000, right? You have to work on those 7,000, and that takes a much deeper approach. And that's where live phone calls on the nights and weekends. This is what's not fair to teachers and staff, man. They work all day, and then you want them to call at nights and weekends. And why nights and weekends? Because that's when the parents are available. That's when people are picking up their phone. At work, they're at work or they're doing something during the day. So, and door knocks, nights and weekends. You've got to go to them and find out what's going on, figure out why that you're having this issue, and then you begin to start the second part of the framework is you begin to work on those issues, right? So is it a transportation issue? Is it a long-term illness? Is it homelessness? Is it homelessness? I had a school district the other day bring up that you can't help homeless kids. I mean, they're homeless. Well, no, you can't. You can if you have a solid framework and some proven success models to do it. And we go to the places where homeless people are staying. Sometimes those are encampments. Sometimes those are temporary housing or hotels. And you've got to let them know that it's okay. Their students can go to school. We're going to have a bus come by or a van come by from the school district, pick them up, bring them there, and we can help arrange all that stuff. But the babies need to be in school, and we'll feed them. And we'll feed them breakfast maybe and lunch. Right? And then we'll drop them off. And we're not going to report you to Child Protective Services to take your babies away. And so all those things can be dealt with if you're very, if you know the why and then you really want to work on the solution, which, by the way, Every school district we've ever worked with absolutely wants to help those children. So it's dope. And I know you do too. So we've even dealt with like vacation issues, like where people don't plan their vacation according to the school schedule. And there's some tactics about how to do that. And then there's just bad data. We've learned that there's bad data. The child actually moved. The children is another school and the reports aren't there. Anyway, the basic gist is you identify why, and then you start working on the solution. And that alone drives down chronic absenteeism rates. And I would say that the toughest thing in all this is, man, I'm gonna get yelled at. I'm gonna get yelled at about it. I just know it. There's just some families you can't do anything about. There's a certain percentage, I think it's around 8 to 9% in most areas, that there's just nothing you can do to get them to show up. And it breaks my heart. I get it. It's sad. It stinks. I don't like it. But I have to worry. You should worry about the low-hanging fruit. That if you're at a 25% absenteeism rate, which is national norm now, how do we get it to 15%? Let's get that 10% drop first, and then we can worry about another 10% drop. And then we can worry about the most difficult ones. But you have to say no to certain things instead of just doing a dumb, silly advertising or marketing campaign. Like, you can't just market to people and expect them to show back up. You got to resolve their issues. And so I know that there's 5 to 8, 12% in some areas that we can't fix today. We're going to have to put them in the parking lot for a little bit. And I don't know who those are. I'm not saying that they're like we automatically know what kind of group this is. You don't know. But in this framework, when we're reaching out to families, and when you're reaching out to families, 9 to 21 contacts. 9 to 21 attempts to find out what the why is. That's just an attempt. Now, look, that's not to solve the problem. That's just to reach out to them and get them to communicate with you. It could take you up to 21 attempts before they'll actually say, well, yeah, here's my problem. You've got to bug them. You've got to be in their face. If you really want to solve their issue, you've got to reach out to them, because the most current study says that we as humans get 15,000 messages a day. 15,000 messages a day. We've got to cut through that. And most campaigns, I'm sorry I'm wiggling around so much. My back, I did a hard workout yesterday, and I'm delaying my workout today. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to keep going. Is they stop short. They send a couple text messages. They send a couple emails, and they're like, we don't know where they are. You can find them. But you have to cut through all the noise. You have to cut through those 15,000 contacts. You have to bury them with, we love your child. Where are they? Please contact us. And I'm telling you, the first 6 to 7, they don't even notice. They just, how many emails have you skipped today? How many text messages you just, I'll get to it. I can't deal with this right now. How many phone calls have you ignored? How many pieces of mail have you thrown away? You can't get frustrated about reality. And the reality of it is, you've got to commit to whatever campaign team you're using, internal or, us, is you've got to get out there and do 9 to 21 contacts. It used to be 7, but now it's 9. And then once you create a dialogue, then you have to continue to talk to them to solve the problem. It's work. It is work. It is effort, but it is work, and it does work. It does. Yeah, it is work, and it does work, right? And you just have to be committed, and you can't have your team get frustrated. If they get frustrated after they made 3 attempts and they throw their hands up, you've got to re-educate them and retrain them on how to do this. And they cannot get bored until they reach out at minimum 9 times. Minimum 9 times, then you can make an assessment. And so what I said with, there's certain people that are just never going to penetrate. Once you hit the 21 attempts, you're now dealing with the bulk of people. They're in the queue. You're working, you're solving their problem. If you can get to those problems, those lower hanging fruits, then you can tackle those ones that are just more difficult, right? The ones that are just more harder to penetrate, harder to get out there, harder to work with, right? And if you can do all that first stuff and you can get your rate down to, let's say 12%, give or take a couple points, then you can start tackle the really tough issues. And it's a shame that that's the way it is, but I got to worry about the bulk of children in society, and then we'll worry about those super, super tough ones to reach, right? And I love the campaigns that are in for that. A matter of fact, the one that we went out and started tackling the homeless population, they were around 12%. and they wanted to get it down. And I was like, well, we're going to do some next level stuff for you. And it was so cool to watch a homeless child. They were in housing, but temporary housing, is like dorm settings and stuff. But to see them go to school and see the little bright eyes and excitement, and we even got like some local businesses to donate like, backpacks and clothes and things like that, right? Oh, like speaking of the issues that we've resolved, some of the issues are like washing clothes. The kids are embarrassed and they don't want to go for washing clothes. And we worked with one district and they put in a little laundry mat. The kids could do their laundry while they're in class and go get clean clothes. And I mean, it sounds so foreign to some of you, but we didn't know that was the issue until we identified it in the why. And then like, hey, let's figure out a way to put some laundry mats in. Let's get them donated. Let's have some soap donated. Let's learn how to do home ec and figure out how to work that situation. These are the kind of things that you tackle when you dig into the why. All right. So now that we've kind of, then once you get the students back in, as a third framework model of this is you got to monitor those children most in need and continue to be positive. So now, let's get into the framework a little deeper. Okay. Because some of you're nerds like me and you want to know really how to do it. So the first thing is that when you're discussing chronic absenteeism with parents, it's really important to approach the conversation with empathy and collaboration and solution-oriented mindset and not accusatory. Your child is not showing up and it's your fault and you're a bad parent. They're shut down. They're out. They're going to take their students somewhere else. So the key step is you got to build trust and positivity to begin with. Positive tones, and you got to look at your text messages or call scripts, whatever you're doing, you've got to really dig in and make sure that you have a positive, solution-minded tone. And it's funny that this really ties into conflict resolution and dispute resolution, which we deliver some courses for school board staff and parents on how to deal with. And you got to advocate. You got to be positive. You can't get defensive, and you can't get attacky on it. And you got to emphasize that, hey, we're a partner with you. We're not blaming anybody. This is just, it's a deal that let's deal with it. And so here's a good example, I think, is I want to start by saying how much we value little Brian Stevens. He's such a bright student. I don't think I was ever called a bright student when I was missing a lot of school. But anyway, they would say this. They would say, his sister is so bright and intelligent, so why isn't he? But anyway, they are such a bright student and we've noticed the potential. And we're all on the same team, and we'd love to talk with you about how to make this child successful. We'd love for you to communicate with us, email, let's set a time up and talk about their success. And then once you get them in the room, you go, hey, you talk about all those first points of the importance of showing up and some other things in a non-accusatory way, right? So I think that's the first attempt, right? Once you've done your 9 contacts, actually get a meeting set. So those are all the text message and emails you send out. So the next one is, schools can absolutely leverage FOMO, fear of missing out. This has been really effective. And some of the things you do is you highlight like what the average number of missing days is, and then you say, hey, but your child's missed a lot more than that. We'd like to get them, so hey, your child's missed 10 days. The average is 2 days. That's not the first thing I'd start with. I'd start with this positivity thing, but if you start letting them know what they're missing out on, people don't want to miss out on things. They want to be a part of the club. They want to be a part of the party, right? And so in the FOMO kind of analysis, and that's an actual like component of some campaigns. It's all very particular to particular districts. You got to figure out what's going to work for you. Is you want to highlight like special events and promote unique opportunities, school assemblies, guest speakers, exciting class activities that you want to show up to, and those kids will show up, and clubs and extracurricular activities. One of the biggest drivers now of getting a student to enroll in your district, side note, is really having great extracurricular activities and letting them know that sports teams and school clubs, let's get into this. And if they're going to stay after school and do those, or even before school starts, they got to show up to school to do those. So really highlighting those. And then some programs have used peer influence models where it's like a student to student or social media student ambassadors to kind of leverage what's happening in the school district. I like that if you can keep it organized and consistent and moving forward, right? But creating like peer-led initiatives where students share the importance of attending and the fun engagement on their own socials. So you get a little ambassador group. It can work, but only if it's really led by somebody. If not, it kind of looks a little artificial and a little false and not authentic enough. It's got to be authentic. And so something to think about is these peer influence groups. Even back to the old days in the 70s and 80s, incentive awards for attendance, little stars on a chart. I don't know. I mean, I get a little nervous about this because it can have the actually devastating negative effect. If you like put the stars on a board for every day you show up and your name is the little name with no stars, at some point it gets to be so demoralizing, you completely disengage as a student. And it's just like, screw it. I just rather have no stars. And if I have another day of no stars and the teacher, I remember this, man. I had this teacher in a band. I was in a jazz band, and he tried to humiliate and humble us for not getting a slip of paper and bringing it that we did our practicing, right? Like a little note. And if you brought a note that your parents said they practiced, you got a star. And I would never get a star because my mom was busy, man. I mean, sometimes my sister would fake it and sign her signature and stuff like that. But I think about those kids at the most risk or the most need. And I mean, I'm just giving you my personal experiences, but there's quite a bit of research on this that it can actually have the visible appearance of failure is a scary thing for children. Now, we use it on sales teams all the time. Who's the best seller? Who's the worst seller? And it typically drives mediocre, mild sellers to become great sellers, become great performers. But the ones that are on the cusp, the worst ones, get fired or quit. Now, that works in companies, but we don't want that for our children, right? We don't want these groups of 25% of the children to disengage and quit because they were shamed. So I would watch the public showcase of attendance, which really is the antithesis of that, which is no attendance. I'd be careful. I'd be really careful with that. We can dig into that more if anybody's interesting. And certainly creating a positive culture and inclusive school environment. Everybody's doing that. You're doing everything you can, And then the last bucket is this leveraging of technology. And certainly we use technology. We use a little bit of AI. We don't get crazy with it because we need real-time in-person people communicating, but the follow-up sometimes it can be leveraged by apps and technology and text messages and emails, and all those things have got to be utilized for sure, right? But real-time notifications, if they're accurate and your data is good, stuff like your class is participating in a fun group project today. Don't miss out, like in the mornings. Sometimes that can, that's considered a form of AI, but it's really just mass communication. So mass communication is a great component of a great chronic absence prevention campaign too. All right. The other thing is this, you've got to communicate to the parents and family what the definition of chronic absenteeism, and then you got to explain the long-term impact. We already covered that in the first part of this. I don't know if Jack's going to split this up into multiple videos or not, but in part one of our video, we talked about the importance of attendance. That's got to be explained to the parents, the community, the teachers. It's got to be explained to everybody over and over again. Do not get lazy about the belief that people think that they know it's important. And our study shows, again, our research shows it. A lot of people don't know it's important. I know. I am shocked and mesmerized also, but that's the dirt. A lot of people just don't get it. So you have to explain the importance of attending, right? So then once you get into the problems statements, you're learning like what it is, I'm going to ask you to really be open, and the things you learn, I mean, like the laundry issue, like clean clothes, like, hey, Johnny, what's going on, man? It's like some embarrassing, like you got to talk to us, man. And like, we can cure these problems. And we found out that in another area, it was a feminine hygiene issue, right? And they just needed products provided to them and got donations to do that. And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for me as a dad of a girl to talk about it. And she always wants to talk about it to embarrass me. But we've got to get real, and you've got to actively listen, and then you begin to focus on those solutions, right? Okay. So once you determine the issues, you then provide those resources where you can. You offer tangible resources like a laundromat, for instance, or different transportation issues, right? Whatever those issues are that you're facing. If it's a serious illness, is there any way to help with medical care? I know that's outside of your thing, but at least can you refer them to the right source? And we've managed to do that too. What about tutoring programs, school counseling? I don't know. Whatever the issue is, start to actually provide the resources and support. In some cases, we conduct a long-term plan for a student, but mainly the districts end up doing that. And so that's really more their specific space. And I would love to, probably going to interview some people on what their long-term plans are to help students combat whatever issues they're dealing with. I think I'm probably not the right one to dig into that, but no, a clear plan for individuals can be really vital. I've got to get some experts on that subject. That's not me. We typically get them in, get them showed up, solve the problem, then the schools take over and do the really long-term lifting of that, unless they want to bring us back in, right? So I'm gonna skip some of these things. So we talked about so many different subjects. I don't see anything different on this particular plan that I want to dig into other than what we've covered at kind of some level of nauseism right now. But here's the deal. Reducing chronic absenteeism requires this really comprehensive approach where it is repetitive, it's not exciting, it's not marketing, it's not advertising, it's direct contact, solving people's problems, understanding the root cause of the absenteeism, and addressing those barriers, and then it actually works. It actually works. So, like, I have this is a pretty long video, and I'm glad if you stayed around for the whole thing. And we're going to dig in more. If you like anything specific driven into, we're going to be doing more of these deep dive educational videos to help public schools just crush it, just be as awesome as we know that they should and can be in so many areas. And we want those kids in those schools learning from you. So I hope this helps. Thanks.